Okay, hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Chicago Horn Loudspeaker Guys. My name is Quinn Lee. I'm again with my partner in crime, Tom Brennan. Today, we're gonna kick off a new series that we are gonna introduce to you of a gentleman in the Chicago area who had his own studio, who's a horn loudspeaker lover, who was a fine carpenter and a speaker designer. So we're talking about Stephen Merriweather out in the suburbs of Chicago. He's done a lot of good design work using classic cabinet designs and really iconic drivers, and he's also done quite a bit of work of restoring some really interesting speakers. So today, Tom and I are gonna talk about the Altec A4. You know, we in previous episodes we covered the A5, the A7. These are somewhat home-friendly speakers that you can actually fit inside a house. But today we're going to go off the
firehouse.
yeah, we're going to go off the wall and talk about something that really, truly is coming from a movie theater. In fact, these particular A4 speakers are from the Uptown Theater in Chicago. For those of you who are from Chicago and have experience watching movies and going to concerts in that theater, it's an old school theater, not like today's system. So I know the A4 has got an incredible history, and I'm going to let Tom talk about where the A4 fits in the Altec food chain.
Well, the A4s we're going to look at are a set that Steve is building for a guy to use for his home theater. And Steve has put the system together, and he's domesticized the A4s with veneer to make them look nice and look nice inside this fellow's house. The A4 is in the middle of their line of theater speakers. It's kind of the bottom of their top line, which would use multiples of the A4. But the A4 has two Model 515 woofers in its bass bin, which is horn loaded front off of the 515s and then rear reflex loading, like the more familiar A7s and A5s to people. So it's a larger version of that. And then it uses the large horns, the 288 horns, which are larger diaphragm and larger throats than the 802s and 804s that most home hobbyists are familiar with. So Steve is, and then the drivers would be mounted on multicellular horns, as you've seen with the A5 in Queen's Basement. So the A4, when Hilliard and his team had designed the improved Shearer horn system, which was a big improvement over the Western Electric theater speakers, the Shearer horn theater speakers, it was a good job, but Hilliard wasn't happy with the mid-range that was coming through the folded horn. So about 10 years later, he was working at Altec, and he came out, he designed what we today know as the voice of the theater, and he used the bass bins that had front-loaded horns off the woofers and had rear reflex loading to boost the bass a little bit at the lower levels, because for a bass horn to do good bass, it has to be really large.
Right.
So the compromise that Hilliard chose was to let the bass horn take the bass down to around 150, 125 cycles a second, and then reinforce it with bass reflex loading from the back of the cone, which didn't come up as high as the horn, but it did a useful augmentation on the bottom. And so these came out after the Second World War, the voice of the theaters, and they were the standard for a long time until the 80s and 90s when THX came in and they started using direct radiating JBLs, and they wanted more bombastic sound. They didn't care if it sounded as natural. They wanted a lot of boom and tizzle for people in movies that had to outrun explosions, you know. Yeah. If Orson Welles made Citizen Kane today, he'd have to outrun an explosion somewhere in Citizen Kane. I'd like to see Orson Welles outrunning an explosion. That would be a sight. But anyway, that's the story of the A4, and now we're going to show you Steve's big A4, and we'll get on with that.
Well, this A4 is the first of three A4s, right? So
Yes.
we are hoping that in the future, once all the A4s have been domesticated, we'll be able to go to the owner's house and do a follow-up episode showing all three A4s working together in a true home theater system. But Tom, before we go on, you had an interesting take on why Altec speakers or the voice of the theater line is got that battleship gray finish to it.
Well, I was thinking the speaker came out in 1945, and the Navy was, if you study the history of World War II, the Navy was building ships at a tremendous pace. Even in 1945, when it was obvious the war in the Pacific was winding down, and that we were getting closer to Japan, Admiral King, who was in charge of the Navy, Ernest King, whose daughter said about him, he's the most even-tempered man I ever saw. He was always in a rage. They were still building ships like crazy. So 1945, and Altec is thinking, how are we going to paint these things? And probably somebody said, well, Battleship Gray. There's a lot of that Battleship Gray paint around. We can get a really good price on it, you know. And they didn't use the same gray all the time. There's variations in the gray that Altec used. Probably, as Paul Klipsch would say, whatever was available at the time, or what they could get a good price on.
Yeah, these are engineers that we're talking about, not interior designers. I guess.
Now I don't, I'm just, guessing, but it makes sense to me. A lot of things make sense to me.
Yeah. Well, that's a good take. It could be true, could not, right? Who's going to dispute it at this point? But anyway, let's let Steve talk about his A4s, and hopefully we'll be able to play some music for you, and so you can actually experience it.
We're going to talk about the Altec A4 that Steve has made here. And right now you're getting a shot of the whole speaker because it's very tall. And on the bottom is a combination horn reflex box, and on top is a 2-cell Altec horn and compression driver. And here you're getting a look at the size of this thing, okay? All right. Going?
Now.
So tell us about making these, and what's the story here?
All right, well this is an Altec 604. 604 is a theater speaker. It was first introduced in 1945. It replaced the Shearer horn, which was used in a lot of theaters at the time, but this had much better frequency response and much better efficiency. And so it very quickly moved into movie theaters. And I think that they were made and introduced, if you can tell me if I'm wrong, I think into the 60s.
Oh, yeah,
These were
used
still
into the
being built.
80s even.
Really?
They were the standard until the THX started.
Yeah.
And everybody wanted bombastic bass. And so they went to JBL direct radiators,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, these don't do earthquakes, but they go pretty low. So it's kind of an interesting cabinet. This is the ported section here into the bottom, and these are the ports. The top section is actually part of the resonance cavity also. Above where the woofers are here, it has two 15-inch 515 woofers in here, and then there's a kind of a fiber shelf that's right above in here. So it actually allows the sound to go into this cavity up here. Okay. It doesn't close this off, And so this is actually
part of the volume.
It's part of the volume as well.
Yeah.
These used the NC or C500 crossovers. They're in a big electrical box like this. I've built new crossovers for these. These originally had wings that came out about this far on each side that made a big front baffle out of it. So I built these on to give a little bit of that. This helps stiffen the sides here, which have a tendency to ring otherwise, and also for looks. So I veneered this part and this part and built these guys. Built these guys here, new crossovers. The horn is a 203B, which is a 300 cycle 2-cell horn. And we're driving it with Great Plains 399/8 A driver.
So you started with a stock cabinet and modified it, you didn't build the cabinet from,
Right, I had to, the cabinet was pretty well trashed, so I had to, and this evidently, once I finish this one, my client is going to pick up this one and bring me a second one. He's going to use it for his home theater. He lives in a loft in Chicago, and he has a projection screen that's 15 feet wide. So he's going to use this for his home theater, and he's going to bring me the second one. He said that he has 3 of them, and he said that this one was the best one out of the bunch, but it still had a lot of stuff that I needed to put together, and I did a little bit of extra bracing, but for the most part, this is it.
it's not Tom Ronan, is it?
No,
Your customer?
no,
Tom Ronan, is it?
it's Pete Bruce.
Oh, yeah.
Pete is also, he's going to reopen the Double Door Club in Chicago. He's been working on that. He's been renovating this building and hoping to have that open within the next year or 2.
Hey, Stephen, do you know where these A4s came from originally?
He had them given to him.
Oh, wow.
They came out of a movie theater. There were 3 of them, as there generally are when there will be 3 of them behind the screen. There will be a center one and 2 stereo ones.
Okay.
That's usually the way they were set up.
Yeah, and in the days of the 1950s and 60s, the big 70 millimeter
Movies.
roadshow movies,
Yeah.
they had 5 channels behind the screen. That was done with 6-channel magnetic sound. It was true high fidelity, and there was 5 channels behind the screen and 1 channel for effects, what we'd call today a surround channel.
And they would be powered by these A4s.
Or even the bigger ones with the A2s,
Yeah.
like a double A4, isn't it?
Yeah, they made these with as large as I think 6 or
6. I think they went
I
with
think
6.
they had
Yeah.
as many as
Oh my
6
gosh.
woofers across.
Wow.
And then sometimes they had where they would put 2 drivers. There was like a Y off to put 2 drivers on the horn instead of 1.
Right.
Yeah. And then sometimes they would use 2 horns. They'd have one pointed at the balcony and one pointed at the
Audience.
floor theater.
Yeah, they also did the 2 throat things so that they would use a larger driver for the mid-range on one, and then they would have a high frequency driver on the other one. You can do that also on those 2 throat
Yeah.
horns.
I've even seen where he had 4 pictures of 4.
Hey, Steve, typically I've seen these with multi-cell horns. What was the decision process about not using that?
These originally came with either an 805 or a 1005, which is an 8-cell horn or a 10-cell
10-cell.
horn. And this is a 203, which is a 300 cycle 2-cell horn.
Mm-hmm.
The one we got a pair of 803s, which are the 8-cell 300 cycle horns, but the client liked these, so I think that this is what I made the frames for and such. So this system, the weight on this system is rated at about 735 pounds with everything together. I think that's with the wings and everything, but it's still pretty close to that. To move this around in the shop, I don't know if you can see, but there's a block and tackle up
Yeah, you can
there
see
in the
it.
corner to
Oh,
be able
yeah.
to lay this down and to be able to turn it upside down. Because when I veneered the top here, I actually had to have it upside down so that I could work like this. You can't really put veneer on like this.
Yeah.
Lay it on like that. So then I turned it over, and then I could do this section.
Yeah, it looks nice, man.
And then it's all painted black, and then all sprayed with satin lacquer, so that the client said, "I live in the dark. I don't really. It's not about how it looks; it's how it feels." So, so he wants it to, so that gives it a really nice feel. So anyway, I'm almost finished with number 1. I've got this piece still to put on here, but For the most part, other than that, it's done. You can see the crossover, that's the crossover there, if you wanna pick that up,
Yeah, we'll get a shot of that.
this guy
Yeah.
here.
It's a lot smaller than the original 500C box.
But it's a good deal more complex.
Ah, okay. Let me tilt this down and see if I can. Oh, you gotta hold it up higher. Okay, there you go. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, no, it looks nice. How does it sound so far? I mean, what kind of testing have you done in terms of sound?
The thing is amazing.
Okay.
It is really amazing. And it's just so effortless with everything that it does. And I changed the crossover point too, so that the woofers are actually carrying more mid-range than the stock crossover did.
Mm.
The stock crossover really only had very low bass coming out of this and was counting on the horn for everything else.
Ah, okay.
These were designed for dialogue in movies. They were not designed for music, so I designed a crossover that's more for dealing with wider frequency range and
Yeah, yeah.
dynamics.
Yeah. Interesting to see how low these guys can go frequency wise.
Shall we play them?
Yeah, maybe we'll get a chance to record them. I mean, measure them.
Let's do that.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, go.